Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thank you once again for being with us in these weekly videos about the Gita for Everyone program. Today we're going to discuss chapter 16, Divine and Demoniac Nature. We have the analogy of the prison house. That's where we are entrapped in this material world. Chapter 13, material nature, refers to this material world, the prison house. Chapter 14 explains that material nature and how can we cut the bars of the material prison. Chapter 15 gives us the map, how we can escape by following the map. Now we find a very interesting chapter, Divine and Demoniac Nature. What does it mean? It means basically that in this chapter, the inmates of the prison will be described. Right? We can understand that if somebody goes to jail, there are people who are well behaved, and those people who generally get parole or get their sentence suspended or reduced. But in this case, the divine and demoniac nature will determine if the sentence of the inmate will be reduced or extended. Now, what determines that? In the previous chapter, chapter 15, the Vedas are presented. So this, in one sense, is a continuation of the consequences of following or disregarding the Vedas. Krishna begins this chapter describing what are the divine nature and the qualities that a person in such consciousness has. So we have 3 verses right in the beginning of the chapter explaining what are the good qualities of such inmates. Now, just to summarize it, to make it easy, what Krishna is trying to present to us is that we need to search for those qualities. We need to look for that as type of association, because obviously, if you're in the prison house, if you're in the prison, then if you hang out with the wrong crowd, with the inmates that have very bad behavior, what happens is that your sentence could be extended. Thus, first of all, Krishna presents the divine nature. And in the 4th verse, he starts describing, again, briefly, the demoniac nature. But then he calms down Arjuna and he tells him, don't worry, you are endowed with divine nature. So this is the beginning of chapter 16. Basically, we take this chapter as a warning. Do not associate with those with demoniac nature. We have to aim to develop those divine qualities that are explained in the beginning of the chapter. Now, this is a relatively short chapter, only 24 verses. And most of them, around 20 verses or so, are devoted to describe demoniac nature. Just like when we find in chapter 13, nature enjoyed in consciousness, and nature refers to mostly material nature. In the same way, this chapter we find most descriptions about the demoniac and how the person thinks, how the person acts, what's their ideology, what's their action, what are their results, etc. So this is the essence of chapter 16. Be warned that if you do not follow the Vedic scriptures, that determines your qualities as demoniac. Now, just to make it simple, in a simple way we can understand this chapter. Basically, in chapter 15 describes the Vedas. And in chapter 16, divine and demoniac natures are described. So the connection between these 2 chapters is that if you follow the Vedas, you are considered divine. If you disregard the Vedas, then you are considered demoniac. That's the connection between those chapters, 15 and 16. In fact, chapter 14, 15, 16, and further 17 and 18 also connected because, as I mentioned in the previous video, it has a topic of the material nature. So the modes of material nature are described in the different actions, the different even performance of religious activities, sacrifices, penances, charity, etc. are analyzed according to the modes. So this is the connection, and this is most of the sections, the descriptions are about the demoniac. Now, the connection with the next chapter, with chapter 17, it's called Divisions of Faith. since the emphasis here is to follow the Vedas, to follow the scriptures, then somebody may ask, okay, I believe in something greater than myself. I believe that there is a source, but I don't want to follow the Vedas. In fact, I don't want to follow any scripture. What about those? That's the connection. The emphasis here is follow the scriptures, follow the Vedas. The question that Arjuna will present in the beginning of the next chapter is, what if somebody doesn't want to follow the Vedas, doesn't want to follow the scriptures? That is the connection. And in the personal context, we find that this chapter is actually a very useful chapter. Why? Because we can analyze how much of those divine qualities presented in the beginning we have, and how much of those demoniac qualities we manifest or we used to manifest, or what are our weak points, weaknesses, and strength. No questions by Arjuna. Answers, basically this is an expansion of Arjuna's, or the answer that Krishna gives to Arjuna's questions presented at the end of chapter 14, where Arjuna asks, how do we transcend? Remember? How do we transcend? Arjuna asked to Krishna, how do we transcend? So, Krishna is answering that by following the Vedas, we can transcend the modes. By following the most essential recommendation of the Vedas, which is bhakti. But now, in this case, specifically, Krishna is emphasizing that if we follow the path of the Vedic knowledge, we can elevate ourselves. And in contrast to that, or contradictory to that, is that those who do not or disregard the principles of the Vedas, those degrade themselves. So the answer that Krishna gives to that question presented in chapter 14 is extended in chapter 15 and in chapter 16. So this is the essence of this chapter. And we need to try to understand that in the context of the prison house. The last section of the Bhagavad Gita is a very practical instruction that Krishna gives to all the living entities through Arjuna's representation. And thus, Arjuna presents the different questions in the different points of the Bhagavad Gita, while Krishna is bringing forward certain concepts that may be not so clear, so he wants to make it more and more clear. So Krishna here is presenting one of his characteristics as a teacher. And as I mentioned, sometimes he refers to something and then he elaborates. In this case, he gives an analogy, an important analogy, in text 21, where he refers to the 3 doors to hell. That's the only comparison that we find 21 and 22. That Krishna explains that if we do not follow the process of the Vedas, what happens is that lust, anger, and greed, they are compared to the doors to hell. Basically, those who disregard this Vedic process are coming closer to a hellish condition of life. So in this way, we try to summarize the teachings of this chapter. If there is any particular verse that we recommend, is the last verse, 24, where Krishna clearly explains, in contrast with the previous ending of chapter 15, where he says, those who follow this path will achieve perfection, they become wise. And in these last 2 verses, he explains, those who disregard the Vedic scriptures do not achieve perfection, happiness, or the best result in their endeavors. So this is the contrast that Krishna is making. And the point is that if we follow the Vedas, then we will be able to develop good qualities. And if we take association of those who have good qualities, our permanency in prison will be shortened. Then in that way we can achieve the Supreme Kingdom. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this is helpful for your study of the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.